podcast, Literary Lens.
Welcome back, everybody, to Literary Lens, where we delve into the heart of literature and its societal impacts. Today, we have brought in a very special guest. Introduce yourself.
Thank you, thank you. Hello, I am Joseph Berchek, the author of the book Code Talkers.
Oh, hello. My name is Theodore James. I have a master's degree in English, and I will explore in depth about the concepts and aspects of today's books, Code Talkers.
We brought them both here today to discuss the social commentary within the book Code Talkers.
The book Code Talkers. This is an incredible read that talks about the racial prejudice of the Navajo people.
So, before we get into it, tell us, Joseph, what was your motivation when writing Code Talkers?
Well, there are a few reasons. First, I wanted to shed some light on the incredible work that the Navajos did to guide America to success through World War II, despite our ungratefulness at that time. Secondly, I wrote it to give the readers a different perspective of what it's like to be judged primarily based on your ethnicity. Thirdly, to educate children and teens to be more accepting and understanding.
I find it great that your book can demonstrate to the reader how racism can affect minorities. It'll show everyone around what it's like to be treated poorly just because of what your race or ethnic background is. I find it crazy that people can show disdain towards somebody just because the color of their skin is different from theirs.
Here at Literary Lens, it is our goal to make sure that all of our listeners become analytical and respectful people, one book at a time. So let's dive deeper into the book, starting with how you went about creating it, Joseph.
Well, I was never part of the World War II, nor am I a Navajo. I guess it started in around 1970. I'd learned about what the Navajos did in World War II and was immediately interested. I wanted to create a book at that time, but I didn't have enough information to create it, so I then began interviewing and reading about the stories of multiple Navajos that were in the war.
Who were some of the Navajo Code Talkers you interviewed and met with?
I was lucky enough to meet Carl Gorman, Jesse Samuel Smith, Keith Wilson, Lucy Turpinanzo, and Shoto Bige.
What else have you written about?
I was asked by the National Geographic Society to write a book about the long walk of the Navajos and the Trail of Tears of the Cherokees. I was researching the history and culture of the Navajo people for about 2 years to obtain enough information to write these books. I wrote 4 other books that also deal with Navajo and Cherokee subjects.
So you must really know quite a bit about indigenous culture then.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, now that we know a little bit of background for your book, let's analyze some of the implicit references and social commentary within it. In Chapter 2 of Code Talkers, you talk about what it's like for a Navajo to join boarding school during the time. The teachers and superintendents of the school are described to be rude to the Navajos. What were the motives for adding that scene?
Well, most of the code talkers I spoke to said that almost every white person prior to the war tried to eradicate their Navajo culture. I added that scene to make the readers feel uncomfortable and maybe a little upset at the people trying to suppress the Navajos. It showed the reader the more human and real perspective.
Yeah, I get that. When I was reading through that part, I felt empathetic for Ned, and he handled it much better than I could ever.
What were some of the ways that they suppressed the Navajos, Joseph?
Well, there are 2 big ways that they tried to remove the Navajos' culture. First, they didn't like them wearing their indigenous clothing because the white people didn't want to integrate their culture, so they tried to remove it. Secondly, they forbid not only the Navajo students, but the Navajo teachers from speaking in their native tongue.
Why'd you decide to include those parts in the book?
It gives the reader a background on the code talkers came from, while displaying the white people's ethnocentrism.
What do you mean by ethnocentrism?
I am referring to oblivious of white society. They think that their culture is correct and force it onto others. Think of it as superiority complex. And I am sure some of the time the disrespect is accidental, but just comes from a lack of consideration.
Yeah, I like how you phrased that. Not all white people want to be malicious, but it just happens accidentally due to how they've been raised. I think it's very important that children read this book when they're young and malleable, so they can see the world in others' eyes. They adopt prejudiced views from their caretakers and hold these opinions because that is what they've been told and believed in for their entire life.
That is some good insight. One thing that truly upsets me is when a child is bigoted. They have been tainted by the adults in their life who endorse this type of behavior. Still, even through these hardships, the Navajo people persevered. Why do you think that is?
The Navajo culture forces a lot on integrity and grit. They all understood that they were being mistreated, but knew that they simply couldn't give up.
The book showcases how tenacious they are, and it speaks so much about the strength and determination of the indigenous people.
Absolutely. Let's move on to how the perspective of the Navajo changed when they were requested to be enlisted into the army.
I personally find this aspect very interesting. The public view of Navajos has become more positive after World War II. I think I know why. War is very treacherous, and soldiers just want to get through it. They do not care who they're fighting alongside because it kind of unites them. Racism isn't embedded into our nature, but rather a societal construct. So once society is out of the picture, racism will no longer be present.
That is a great way to look at it. People will no longer care about racism during difficult times.
I think something important to note is that during training, many of the other trainees were still kind of discriminating against the Navajos.
Well, when there were actual drills and exercises that they did, the Navajos would do the best, actually. And Ned says in the book that it's because that they were used to the hot weather and endurance.
It shows how the Navajos' endurance is better than others both physically and mentally. They can make it through hardships well. This is because their culture emphasizes perseverance and resilience.
That is something that I admired when interviewing them. Their ability to never give up and to never back down.
How can we, as a society, learn from the Navajos about historical injustices to create a better future?
Recognition and acknowledgement of past injustice are the first steps. Education plays a vital role in playing awareness and empathy.
Empowering Indigenous voices, supporting their cultural initiatives, and honoring their traditions are important steps to being in more inclusive society. Things like reconciliation, respecting Indigenous customs, and letting their voices be heard are all very important steps to achieve this.
How do you envision literature contributing to this dialogue of inclusivity and understanding?
Literature has the power to bridge gaps, challenges, perspectives, and other diverse perspectives by telling stories that highlights the richness of different cultures. Literature fosters empathy and understanding among readers. It can serve as a medium for conversations about industries and culture appreciation.
Your book certainly achieves this by shedding light on these issues. However, it looks like we're running out of time. But before we go, any final thoughts?
Well, I hope my book sparks conversations and encourages readers to reflect on the importance of persevering culture diversity. It is vital to recognize and celebrate the beauty of all cultures, fostering a world where everyone feels valued and respected.
I absolutely agree, and I encourage everyone here to learn about diverse cultures and teach others to accept them.
Wise words. Thank you for this discussion. And to our listeners, we will talk to you on the next episode of Literary Lens.